Merry Christmas once again, snow lovers, and Happy New Year to those of you watching this in 2026, wherever you happen to be. And after all the excitement of last week, this week is turning out to be much quieter weather-wise. Many of us in the Alps did indeed see a white Christmas, albeit largely cosmetic for most places, with the exception of the far southwest. For many, accumulations amounted to little more than a couple of centimetres here and there, often falling in very localised bands out of mid-altitude cloud layers. But in the far southwest, so Piedmonte in Italy and the Alps Maritime once again saw absolutely phenomenal snowfall totals. Over a 4 or 5 day period, parts of Italy, in particular centred around the resort of Prato Nervoso and Limone, received between 2 and 3 metres of snow at altitude. Even down at resort level, at around about 1500 metres, widely in that region they received over 1.5 metres of snow. And as such, many of the resorts in the extreme southwest of the Alps are starting to look more like Japan than they are Italy. Further north and into the Via Latia, the likes of Sestria and Salsi received around 80 centimetres of snow over the same time period, so much less than the extreme southwest, but still a pretty good snowfall total. And that's vastly improved conditions across the Via Latia, with many of the links now open between the French and Italian sides of the resort. Some moderate snowfalls also made it across the border further west into France, in the region around the Equins for example, but much less than was received on the east side of the Massif. The Aosta region also received some moderate snowfalls, but again much less than they had received further south. But beyond these regions, and in the parts of the Alps which need the snow the most, the likes of the Northern Alps and the Dolomites, they received little or no measurable snowfall totals unfortunately. At best, everyone received just a cosmetic dusting of snow. And as such, in many parts of the more northern and eastern Alps, there is now virtually no snow below about 1800 metres, except for the narrow strips of man-made snow on the pisted runs, and even that is becoming very thin, very worn in places. So, all in all, with the exception of the extreme southwest, we are now well below where we should be in terms of snowfall totals, both down at low levels and at altitude, for this period of time in late December, across most of the Alps. So, unfortunately, in spite of the big snowfall totals that we received at the end of November and start of December, for many areas now we are really suffering. And of course, with it being peak holiday season at the moment, that has meant very high traffic on the very limited snow that we do have, which has of course further exacerbated the problem and further reduced the snow cover. So even up high, where coverage is adequate, the snowpack has now become very thin, become very scraped down to the base, and is very icy as a consequence, so not enjoyable to ski at all. But there are exceptions of course. You can still find some enjoyable groomers on the most northerly of aspects, particularly higher up, where the base is more natural and less man-made snow. So you can still enjoy your skiing, but that enjoyment is very limited. Of course, with the fantastic snowfalls in a very localised area, coinciding with the holidays, that led to a mad rush up to the mountains for many holidaymakers. And this of course meant absolute gridlock on the roads and chaos in the car parks. For a while, the main road up to the ski resort of Prato Nervoso itself had to be shut because there were just too many people trying to head up into the mountains to enjoy the snow. So unfortunately for many, that actually meant spending some of the Christmas period sitting in a car, going nowhere. And across a much wider area of the Italian Alps, the great snowfalls over Christmas led to a late surge in bookings. As such, many resorts were incredibly busy, much more busy than they would normally be even at this time of year. Again, this of course led to large queues on lifts, busy slopes, busy bars, busy restaurants, etc. But of course, those areas would much rather have the snow and have too many people than not have the snow and not have any visitors. And in the regions which have largely missed out on all the December snowfalls, that has meant that any areas which do have snow, the higher areas, the bigger ski areas, they have also been incredibly busy, as people from the wider region have been flocking to the few resorts which do have good snow coverage. So that has also led to long queues at many of these resorts. But thankfully, the festive period is nearly over and we should be returning somewhere back to normal very soon. As I predicted in last week's report, after the pleasantly cold weather of the festive period, temperatures and freezing levels then skyrocketed over the weekend throughout the 27th and 28th. In some areas at altitude, particularly in parts of Italy, the temperature jumped more than 15 degrees in the space of about 24 hours, from being around about -2 or -3 up well into the mid to high teens, which would have come as a huge shock. Thankfully, this real intense heat was also very short-lived, but for a while the 0 degrees C isotherm shot up to above 3,500 metres, peaking around the Monte Rosa Massif, and more widely it exceeded 3,300 metres across a large swathe of the Alps. So those are freezing levels that you might expect in early summer, definitely not late December. There have unfortunately been a number of serious and indeed fatal accidents over the festive period. This includes at least 3 major avalanches in the Savoie region of France on Boxing Day itself. One occurred in Val d'Isère, another occurred in Valois, and yet another in the Queyras, and there may well have been others as well. And in all these instances, most, if not all the people involved, were fully equipped. They were carrying the correct equipment. But the correct equipment is not an invincibility shield. It increases your margin for error, but it doesn't eliminate margin for error. And unfortunately, every year, many fully equipped people are killed by avalanches in the Alps. So remember, your most important line of defence is your brain, is your decision making, it is not the equipment that you carry. And this was at a time and place where there have been very little snowfall so far this season. But it really doesn't take so much snowfall to cause a fatal accident in an avalanche. If you get caught in a terrain trap, get carried over a cliff, get carried into rocks, etc. Fatalities do still happen when there's only a very, very small, thin snow layer. And of course, with the sparsity of fresh snow this season so far, when some of these areas did finally get a little bit of fresh snow, everybody would have been in a mad rush to get to the snow, to get the first tracks. And unfortunately, this is what happens. And over the same time period, there's also been at least one fatal accident involving a fall with a skier and a collision with a rock. And again, this was somebody who was wearing a helmet, they were wearing the correct equipment, but still, accidents can happen and they can still have serious consequences. So you really need to be careful, especially when going into the off-piste right now. With the snow conditions being so lean and so thin, there are a lot of rocks around, so the natural hazards are much higher than they would normally be. Moving on to the weather outlook and our prospects for fresh snow going in towards the new year. And for a while now, there's been a lot of talk about potentially huge dumps of snow coming in the new year, around about the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of January. But the computer models had not been able to agree on a preferred forecast and that really pinned down where was going to get the snow, if any. The Alps were due to be a battleground, the dividing line between warmer air to the south and colder air to the north, which was potentially going to bring quite large amounts of precipitation to some areas of the Alps. Whether that fell as rain or snow would depend on exactly where that dividing line sat. Ultimately, the cold air was always going to win out, but the models could not agree on exactly when and how. But the models are now showing much more agreement. They have managed to pin down exactly what we think will happen in the new year. But unfortunately for those of us who really need the snow, it does look like we're not actually going to get very much snow at all. The cold air is winning, the warm air is staying much further to the south, which means there is no dividing line across the Alps. The weather front, which is coming down from the north, is going to have all but petered out by the time it reaches us in the Alps. So again, it's just likely to bring a cosmetic dusting to parts of the northern Alps, a little more than 2 or 3 centimetres here and there, which is nowhere near what we need. We need, well, metres and metres of snow really at this point, but at the very least we need some big storms bringing 20-30 centimetres plus at a time. So 2 or 3 centimetres here and there is really not going to help things much. But it is going to become very, very cold, much colder than seasonal average, in places maybe 8 to 10 degrees colder than expected, which considering we've been well above the seasonal average for virtually all of December, it's going to feel like a huge shock to the system. Temperatures are due to be plummeting. Where we've been seeing temperatures well above zero up on the mountain, indeed it's often been into double figures in the sun, it is now likely to be minus double figures. So that's potentially a drop of around 15 to 20 degrees C, which is absolutely huge. And of course, then when you add on the wind chill as well, that's going to make things feel even colder. So if you are heading out virtually anywhere in the Alps over the coming week or so, be sure to wrap up warm, really bring your warm clothing, because it may not look particularly wintry, but it's going to feel absolutely Baltic. So while there still is virtually no real snow in store for the areas which are due to be hosting the Winter Olympics in just a few weeks' time, at the very least they can turn on their snow cannons and ramp up their snow production. So fingers crossed, most events should be able to go ahead, but it's really not going to be a good image for the Alps, having the flagship snow sports event taking place in regions which have got virtually no real snow. But unfortunately, this is the world we live in right now. The Alps are having to rely more and more on the man-made stuff to be able to keep the lifts running and keep the slopes open. Moving on to a very brief roundup of some representative snowfall depths across the Alps, and starting in the east, at Kranjska Gora in Slovenia, their lower base is 20 centimetres and their upper base is 30 centimetres, and they did receive around 9 centimetres of fresh snow on Christmas Eve. They're also expecting to see a few centimetres over the coming days as well, maybe 2 or 3 centimetres, which won't make any drastic difference to the snow conditions, will at least give a cosmetic dusting and make things look prettier and whiter again. Zell am See in central Austria has 0 snow down at resort level and a base depth of about 32 centimetres up at the top of the mountain, the Smittenhoe. They did receive around 5 centimetres of snow on Boxing Day and another cosmetic dusting yesterday, and they are also due to receive around 4 or 5 centimetres of snow on the 2nd of January. So things are slowly looking up there, but still it's nowhere near the amount of snowfall that they need to really turn the conditions around in that part of the region. Of course, up on the glacier at the Kitzsteinhorn, snow conditions are much better. The base depth there is uniformly around about 70 centimetres deep, which is of course plenty to ski on. But at this time of year, you would expect much greater snowfall totals at that kind of altitude. Moving on to Switzerland, and Andermatt have a base depth at the resort of only 8 centimetres, but up on the mountain they've got around 60 centimetres of snow, which is of course much healthier. But they received little or no snow over the festive period. Their last meaningful snowfall was way back on the 7th of December. But they are at least expecting to get some moderate snowfalls on the 2nd and 3rd of January, maybe 8 to 10 centimetres. Moving on to La Clusaz in northern France, and they only have a snow depth of around 5 centimetres down at resort level, and that's exclusively man-made snow. They are very good at keeping the resort runs open in that resort, so you would hope they'll be able to maintain that. But yeah, it's incredibly thin down at resort level in La Clusaz. But the base depth up on the mountain is still very good, thanks to the snowfall that it received back at the start of December. So they got an upper base depth of 135 centimetres, which is still great going considering there's not been any snow for a month. And they missed out on any of the snowfall over Christmas period. Their last measurable snowfall was way back on the 1st of December. And unfortunately, they are also due to be missing out on any meaningful snowfall into the new year as well, with currently 0 centimetres forecast throughout the next week or more. Bardonecchia in the Via Lattea have a lower base depth of 40 centimetres, but now have an upper base of around 120 centimetres, thanks largely to the snowfall it received over the festive period. But there is currently no snowfall in the forecast for at least the next 7 or 8 days for the Via Lattea region. And finally, moving into the far southwest, which is where it gets really interesting, and Prato Novoso, which was the epicentre of the recent snowfall, are reporting a whopping 280 centimetres to the base depth on the upper mountain, and 210 centimetres down at resort level. So that's only 1,500 metres, they've got over 2 metres of snow on their base, which is truly phenomenal really. We're all very, very jealous of the far southwest at the moment. They are not due any meaningful snowfall in at least the next 7 or 8 days down in that part of the world, but with temperatures remaining cold, it really doesn't matter. They got more than enough snow to go around down there, so I don't think they're going to be complaining too much. And across on the French side of the Alps Maritime, and Isola 2000, they didn't get the outrageous snowfall totals that they got further east, but things are still incredibly healthy down there. They're reporting a lower base depth of 80 centimetres and upper base of 110 centimetres, which is still incredibly good going. They're also not due any meaningful snow in at least the next week or so, but again, they've still got plenty to go out down there. And for something a little different, Portugal has opened its one and only ski resort over the last couple of days, and this is currently now offering better snow conditions than large parts of the Alps, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. So that's just about it from the Alps once again this week, and it really is a case of feast or famine right now. The far southwest are drowning in snowfall, they've had so much, yet the rest of us are virtually dying of thirst. It's been so dry throughout the whole of December. We really do need some really big dumps of snow coming down from the north and west, because right now the conditions are getting really quite depressing in a lot of places. Up high, there is still enough snow to play on, but the quality is just so poor right now that it's really not that enjoyable to be out skiing at the moment, unfortunately. So please keep doing your snow dances. We really need that snow to calm down and come down soon, because unfortunately for a lot of resorts this season so far is shaping up to be one of the worst in a long time. So on that cheerful note, I'm wishing you all Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year once again, and a big thank you to the team at Salzy Online, and also from Snow Camps Europe who've joined the fold this week. So if you are planning to go skiing in the Via Lattea region at all, then I'd highly recommend you head across to their channel at Salzy Online to check out conditions there and get a much more detailed and up-to-date forecast of what's going on down there. And if you're heading to the Zell region or Capun region in Austria, then again, head across to Snow Camps Europe and check out his channel and his snow reports there. They're much more detailed than what I'm showing you right here. So go and show their channels some love too, and give them a like and subscribe as well. But that's it from me for another week. Till next time.